Chapter 19. Knuckles white. Betty used every ounce of her strength to escape the vampires. Grasp. You said you don't like the taste of shifters. She gasped between words, losing the struggle. The vampire's hold didn't budge. It was like he was made of steel. He inched closer, a teasing smile tugged at his lips. Beggars can't be choosers. Betty had met other vampires before. None this aggressive or bloodthirsty. She didn't get a chance to respond. A furry arm shot over her shoulder, thick with muscles and fingers tipped with claws. It gripped the vampire by the throat. Her assailant shuddered from the impact. She jerked in surprise and twisted to look over her shoulder. Ken had shifted. Shreds of his outfit still clung to his shoulders and hips. He was the most wonderful thing she'd ever seen. Let her go or I rip your head off. His gravelly voice was also the scariest thing she'd ever heard. So far Betty had only known Ken as her mate. This was the beta of Newport pack. Her mate shoved her behind him and stepped kissing close to the vampire. You dare lick my mate. Spit flew from his sharp-toothed muzzle and dark blood trickled from where claws pierced the vampire's skin. She grimaced at the acrid smell and rubbed her sore upper arms, the pain blending with the throbbing ache in her face. What a bride she'd be, covered in bruises and cuts. She sobbed and laughed at the same time. What if her nose was broken and crooked? She didn't heal as fast as full-blooded shifters. The injuries would need time to fade. Ken glanced at her, his eyes narrowing at her injured face. His body seemed to grow bigger as he loomed over both her and the vampire. The muscles in his neck corded and he turned back to the vampire with a snarl. I'm going to eat you slowly. She gagged. No, you're not. Shifters didn't eat people. They left that to the vampires. Though she wasn't sure if she considered Victor a person by the way he was acting, she'd give him the benefit of the doubt. Thundering steps descended the stairs. Victor. Owen swept into the room, followed by Angie back in her human form, an old tattered robe wrapped around her body, the hem dragging on the floor. The dark dragon came to a sudden stop. His gaze scanned everyone in the room, and he ran his hand over his shaved head, lips pressed together. If anyone was going to eat anyone, he stood 2 feet from her and could barbecue all 3 of them in one breath. Betty Newman. She held up her hand as a reflex, heart and throat and a prayer on the tip of her tongue. Dog rescuer. Owen blinked and shook her hand. Owen Grant, scourge of Newport. Angie looked past Owen, eyebrows furrowed as her gaze traced the chains from Victor's wrists. Why is there a man chained in our basement? Vampire, Betty clarified. Owen shot her a warning glare before addressing Ken. Don't kill him. Victor's not sane. He can't be held accountable for his actions. The vampire threw his head back, laughing. The sound haunted and sad. Ken tossed Victor against the far wall. The vampire's feet never touched the ground. He puddled to the floor, still laughing. She shuddered and stepped closer to Ken. She hoped to never see Victor again. He hurt her. Ken scooped Betty in his arms and knocked Owen out of his way. That's the last time I trust you, Angie. Victor. The black dragon hissed behind them. What am I going to do with you? Angie blocked the stairs. Actually, that was me. I heard her. Betty could have heard a pin drop in the sudden quiet. Even Victor quit his manic laughing. This should be good. The vampire rose, untangling the chains from his legs. Why? Ken tensed. She could sense the muscles in his body as if spring loaded. He wouldn't attack his best friend, would he? Betty stroked his head, turning his gaze to hers. She was trying to help me connect with my shifter side. By beating on you? He sounded so flabbergasted. The heat of her blood rushing to her face made her cheeks ache. She'd been silly to agree, Betty saw that now, but she was so desperate to shift. It might have worked if not for the rats. Angie shuddered. Betty twisted to face Angie. You do realize you're a dragon, right? They're much smaller than you. So are spiders, but you won't see me touching one. She pointed at Owen. You promised to take care of the rodent problem a week ago. Why am I still running into those things? A week? That's like 5 minutes in dragon time. Owen crossed his arms. For the last time, there is no such thing as dragon time. Angie pushed past Ken and poked Owen, who was twice her size, in the abdomen. Why is there a vampire named Victor chained in our basement? Dungeon. Angie made a horrified noise. We don't need a dungeon. We're not in the Middle Ages. Ken climbed the stairs, ignoring the fighting dragons and Victor's crazy laughter. I should have never left you alone with dragons. Ken strode out of the castle and set her by his car. He ran his hands over her face and limbs. Where does it hurt the most? She scratched behind his ear and he immediately leaned into it. I'm fine. Oh, my injuries are superficial. He took such care in examining her face, which still pulsed with her heartbeat. Does my nose look broken? He shook his head. Your eyes are swelling though. Did she punch you in the face? Ken, I can't believe she hit you. He slammed his hand down on the roof of his car. I thought she was my friend. She is. Oh no, she didn't want to come between their friendship. She asked me first. And you agreed? His ears laid flat on his head. What possessed you? She thought if I was attacked I might shift to defend myself. Betty shrugged. It might have worked if not for the rats. She doubted Ken would ever leave her alone with Angie again. He growled. That's a myth. I can't believe that story is still circulating. She could have killed you. I know, she whispered. How could she explain her heart's desire to someone who already had everything she wanted? Ken had it all. Shifting position. And pack. If he lost it all, maybe then he'd understand the lengths she was willing to go to be considered a werewolf. It wasn't like she was pure human with grandiose ideas of being a supernatural. Half of her genetic makeup was shifter. Why couldn't she have inherited the gene to change shape? She had everything else. Even the sacred soulmate. Ken opened his trunk and rummaged inside. She stared at the old castle. Evening shadows crept up the walls. It was later than she'd thought. Time flew when your life was threatened. Ivy grew on the closest tower and reached high to the roof. A bird flew into a broken window. The place was almost as bad as the building she rented. Maybe the eviction was a blessing in disguise. The push she needed to move on. If she left Newport, if she left Ken, they'd all be safe. When he returned, he pulled her to him, having dressed in workout clothes. His gaze seemed only fractionally less insane with rage. He kissed her and she didn't care that the stubble shadowing his chiseled jaw rasped her bruised face. All she focused on was the kiss. The force of his love as he claimed her. He grew more demanding, pressing their mouths together as if he was dying of thirst and she the last drink of water. She flinched. She couldn't help it. Angie had a good left hook and Betty's lips were bruised. He pulled back and ran his thumb softly under her eyes. Let's take care of this. He opened the passenger side door and helped her inside. Betty could still smell his fury, but it faded as they drove from the castle. She didn't know her way home from here, but as they passed manicured lawns and single-family homes, she realized they weren't heading for the rescue. Is this where you live? She'd heard of neighborhoods like this, seen them on television, but had believed they were a myth. She leaned against the window, staring at the perfect gardens and jogging paths. A place where she dreamed of living as a child. The mystical suburbs. Her family had always lived in the heart of the city, so when she'd moved it had seemed natural to remain urban. My house is on the next block. He turned the corner. House? That seemed expensive for a single guy. Do you still live with your dad? He eyed her like she'd grown a second head. I don't have a death wish. I'm his beta. He kicked me out as soon as I won that position. How old were you? 16. She gasped. In human society, it would have been illegal to toss a teenager out on his own, but not in a pack. It was rare for someone so young to gain a position that high. When Ken he had to prove he could take care of himself. If not, then how could he care for the pack? Was your dad allowed to help? The pack agreed he could pay for my college. Until then I had to work to support myself until I finished high school. He winked. I have grandparents. My grandma always made sure I was well fed. I'm sure the groceries that magically appeared in my fridge came from Ryota. He glanced at her. Don't look so shocked. It's a territory thing. I'm Ryota's biggest rival, if that makes more sense for you. Sticking us under the same roof is just asking for trouble. My moving out saved our relationship. I understand the logistics, but it must have been hard. I take it you didn't socialize with many top hunters in the pack? No, my dad ranks in the middle somewhere. He never cared about power. Ken pulled up to a white house nestled on the edge of the forest. The setting sun sparkled on the windows and the walls glowed with warmth. picket fence surrounded the manicured lawn. He even had a flower garden. Everything here is mine. No gifts. I earned every blade of grass. She pried her gaze from his home and met his curious stare. You like it? He almost seemed shy. I don't invite anyone here except family. A territory thing? He probably peed on his border.
Instinct rode dominant werewolf's hart.
If not, there would be chaos. The dominance kept the others in line. Newport was a fine place to live as a shifter because Ryota and Ken kept a tight leash on their packmates, unlike what she remembered from Riverbend. The old alpha had struggled to control his shifters. It had caused a rift between the pack and everyone else in the city. She'd heard things were mending under the new alpha. It's beautiful, Ken. She got out of the car and leaned against the side. Ken joined her. His home wasn't what she had expected. She hadn't had a picture in her head, but he was a bachelor. Maybe something less suburban? The tension seemed to melt from Ken's face and shoulders as he inhaled the air. No, she was wrong. This did suit him. His gaze traveled over his property with a possessive passion. She'd seen this look on him as he had looked at her. He sighed. Home. That word held power. For an orphan, it probably was magical. Ken bore the responsibility of Beta all the time except here. This place was his haven. The sounds of barking reached her ears. She instinctively turned toward the noise. Want to meet my dogs? Do I? She tugged him toward the house. Inside, they were greeted by his small canine pack, ranging in size from a puppy lap dog to a German shepherd. He introduced each one by name. They met her with such enthusiasm, licking and yipping. For recent strays, they were quite friendly. It spoke of Ken's nature that these animals were so happy and trusting. They knew their master would protect them. He led them to the back door and set the dogs out in the yard to play. I'll get an ice pack. That swelling looks worse. She fingered her lip. It felt worse too, and she tried not to imagine how she looked. After sitting on the leather couch in the living room, she fingered the new-looking side table. She'd never owned anything new or this pretty. Blood smeared where her fingertips touched. Well shit, no wonder she didn't own anything nice. He sat next to her, so close he pinned her to the corner and gently pressed the ice pack to her injury. I made a mess. She mumbled past the compress and pointed to the table. He shrugged. I'll clean it later. He eyed her face, caressing every injury with the heat of new fury. I can't believe Angie hit you. She's a dragon. She could have done some serious damage. I can't believe you took on a vampire. They could do some serious damage, too. Talking with an ice pack to her lip took some serious skills. Vampires were stronger than shifters. She'd experienced it firsthand less than an hour ago. She knew how strong Victor was, and Ken had flung him like a rag doll. He snorted. There are only two people who make me nervous, Ryota and Owen. She ran her fingers through his hair, recalling how he'd come to her rescue. My big strong shifter. She could get used to being the damsel in distress. It was a nice change to be the one rescued. He made a pleased noise in his throat. I'd never let anything happen to you. His brow furrowed and she could smell the acidic smell of fear. I don't want to think about what would have happened if I arrived a few minutes later. She stroked his hair, her throat tight. She didn't want to think about it either. It would have been an epic explosion of violence between her mate, the Black Dragon of Newport, and an insane vampire. Not to mention the destruction of his friendship with Angie. Pushing the ice pack away, she changed the subject, not wanting him to dwell on bad things. I think your home is beautiful. Do you really like it? She played with his silken strands. Yes. It was something out of a dream. Then it's yours. She laughed. Just like that. He pulled her hand to his lips and kissed her scraped palm. Yes. You're serious? I want you to live here and do whatever you want to the place. It's your home. Now. But you're going to stay with me, right? It sounded stupid as she said it. But part of her was still waiting for him to leave. You'll never be rid of me, Betty. Tugging his hair, she pulled him close enough to brush her bruised mouth over his. Promise. That came out needier than she wanted it to, but Ken was asking her to hand over her battered heart on a silver platter. She was drowning and he was extending a lifesaver. If she grabbed it, she wasn't going to let go. He buried his nose against her neck and inhaled. A possessive growl followed. If I were you, I'd be more worried about ever trying to escape me. She closed her eyes as his heavy body pressed her into the couch. Why would I ever want to do that? She could sense his lips spread into a smile against her skin. Mr. Birch, you seem to have me trapped in a compromising position. Am I hurting you? He jerked away, taking away his comforting weight. She sighed. No, silly. I'm flirting with you. She undid the top button of his shirt, then the second. Oh. His gaze followed her fingers. What are you going to do about it? Let me consider my options. She finished unfastening his shirt and admired his defined chest and abs. Nice. Ken cupped her left breast over her t-shirt and squeezed. Nice. She laughed and trailed her fingers lower to his jeans. His hand moved lightning quick and covered hers. You're hurt. I am hurt. She nipped at his jawline in shifter playfulness. And you're hot. Let an injured girl indulge. He blew out a long breath before releasing her hand. Be gentle. He rolled off, lying next to her, hands behind his head. She made a satisfied noise and sat up straighter. Where was I? He pointed to his zipper. Oh yeah. She brushed the fastening with her fingertips, sensing the hard package beneath. This shifter belonged to her? Ken closed his eyes, fisting his hand before he tucked it behind his head. Again. She loved the way he reacted to the simplest of her touches. His chest heaved as if he struggled for air. She kissed his breastbone while undoing his pants. Are you okay? Do I need to call 911? Only if you want to put out the fire in my pants. She chuckled and slipped her hand under the waistband of his boxers. Why would I want that? Betty caught his gaze with her own. Instinct kicked in and she lowered her chin. Like her father, she didn't care about power and wasn't very dominant unless her family was threatened. Ken caught her chin and lifted her gaze back. His expression had grown serious. You don't ever have to look away. Not with me. Leaning forward, she stared into his luminous golden eyes and stroked his cock. He hissed on contact, the muscles in his neck straining. What are you thinking? She continued, touching him faster and faster. He groaned. All the things I want to do to you. He thrust his hips. Betty. His back arched. Faster. She leaned by his ear and breathed out. Show me. With his thumbs, he shimmied his jeans and boxers off his hips, then pressed his hand over Betty's, showing exactly how he needed her to stroke him. He still had her gaze captured. Lips parted, eyes smoldering, and her the center of his universe. The oxygen in the room seemed suddenly thin, as if Ken had used all of it. His gaze was so intense. He wanted all of her. Heart, body, and soul. Could she give him everything? He cupped her cheek. You're so beautiful. She leaned forward, kissing him, taking his mouth, claiming him. He was willing to give it all to her. He was so open and trusting, as if he just knew she'd never hurt him. Why couldn't she do the same? He moaned into their kiss, tangling his fingers into her hair as he climaxed. Betty trailed small, tender kisses over his cheeks and up along his forehead, lingering slowly on each one while Ken caught his breath. With a content sigh, he slipped his hands under the hem of her shirt. Your turn. You did me yesterday. He grinned. This isn't tit for tat. I need to touch you, be inside you. He cupped her breasts over her bra and gave her a very serious look. These need to be set free. She rose slowly to her feet, playing with the hem of her shirt and teasing him with a peek of her abdomen. You have any music? You're going to dance for me? Maybe. He grabbed some tissues from a box on the side table and cleaned up before pulling on his jeans. Let me find. Ken's cell phone chimed. He went still and glanced at Betty. A beta's job is never done. She sighed. Answer it. He read the text message and his fierce growl took her by surprise. She retreated a step. What is it? Ken looked on the verge of shifting. I've been challenged. Nothing could have shocked her more. Ken was a great beta and so powerful. Who would dare challenge her mate? She blinked as the thought finished. Wow, she had it bad. Who? When? Tonight, and I won't know until I get there, but I've got an inkling as to who. This time I'll put him in traction for a month. Chapter 20. That asshole Joshua hadn't even waited 24 hours after his and Ken's conversation to file an official challenge. Joshua would make a terrible beta. No formal education, no patience, and no tact. How did he think he could Assist Ryota in running the pack? If anything, Ryota would kill him to be rid of the problem. Ken didn't like killing, but tonight he might have a change of heart. He needed a secure position in the pack to make a solid claim for Betty. She needed more time to learn to shift. As a strong beta, he could push for this. Otherwise, they'd be chased out of the city. In the distance, the Shifter Challenge Arena loomed over his car as they drew closer. Every shifter group in Newport, be it a wolf pack or cat pride or bear sleuth, paid a tithe to the Challenge Arena for maintenance. There were no ticket sales. All people were welcome to bear witness. Ken had convinced the shifter community to sell food during challenges to help lower costs and create part-time jobs for some college kids. The parking lot was full. A high-level fight like this would fill the place. But there was a crowd surrounding the building. More people than any challenge he'd seen. Betty's head swiveled back and forth. I've never seen this place so crowded. You've come to challenges before? He and she had come so close to meeting. And always he'd somehow missed finding her. Of course, but I avoided the pack ones. Too close to my heart, but the last tiger one was amazing. The way Nora flipped Cheta against the cage wall, bending the poles. That was full of awesome sauce. You're a tiger fan? He chuckled. Of course, his fierce little wolf would be. Dude, I have an autograph book that I started as a kid. She blew on her nails and shined them on her shirt. I have Nora's. The knot of tension in his gut loosened as he laughed. Her smile faded a little as if she fought to hide her worry. You can sign it. Once you win. She gripped his hand, fear a shadow in her eyes. He kissed her hand. I will win. I've fought this hunter before. He hasn't a chance. Why would he challenge you again? Hardhead. His father was the old beta and he thinks it's his birthright. Ken shrugged. Even though Ryota had officially adopted him, some of the pack still saw him as an orphan. He parked the car in the spot held for challengers and they exited the car. Strolling toward the crowd with Betty on his arm, he took a minute to enjoy the feel of her body against his. Once this was finished, he would take her home and make her his. No more interruptions. The crowd parted, letting them pass, and voices grew hushed. He didn't recognize most of these people, though they smelled like wolf. What the fuck? He knew everyone in Newport Pack. Standing room only. A vendor shouted at the entrance. Newport shifters have priority seating. Betty and he exchanged looks. That was unheard of. He spun a slow circle, trying to see a familiar face. She pointed over the crowd. The press is here. You're going to be a popular guy tomorrow. Or seriously unpopular if he lost. This felt wrong. Who the hell was he fighting? What is the news doing here? Betty's whisper sounded urgent. She was right. Though, this match didn't warrant a news report. If he was challenging Ryota for the pack, that would draw attention. Betty half-heartedly waved at someone in the crowd, eyes wide and her steps uncertain. A lot of Riverbend pack is here. What the fuck? She echoed his earlier thought. He scratched his head. Is it possible my challenger has ties to your old pack? He couldn't recall Joshua talking about Riverbend family, but he didn't always listen to the hunter. Anything is possible. I don't keep in contact with anyone but my dad, and we don't discuss pack things. It's not against policy if you did. He pulled Betty behind and through the front doors of the arena. I know, I just don't want to. Old wounds and all. She had to shout so he could hear her. Inside the venue, 1,000 voices spoke at the same time. The hum was so loud they didn't bother continuing the conversation. He pulled her through a staff-only door. At the end of the long cement hall, Ryota leaned against the wall waiting. He straightened and smoothed his suit jacket. About time. He opened the door to the prep room and let them inside. From here, Ken had access to the fighting cage. Ryota, let me introduce my soulmate, Betty Newman. Ken noted how his father's eyes narrowed when he called her his soulmate. The alpha had had Ken's whole life plan from the day he adopted him. Betty wasn't a part of that plan. His alpha acknowledged her with a sharp nod. I've heard of Miss Newman. She swallowed visibly. Nice to meet you, Alpha. At first sight, Ryota seemed like a slim Asian businessman, then his gaze captured yours and you wanted to sit at his feet. Ken had actually seen shifters do that. Betty didn't, but he scented her nervousness. The alpha assessed her head to toe. Who did that to your face? The white dragon. She cleared her throat. Ryota's eyes widened as his gaze darted to Ken's. Angie fought you? It's more like she beat. Yes, he interrupted Betty. She didn't know Ryota's history with Angie, and Betty might not understand not to show weakness in front of dominant wolves. It made her appear like prey. Her father was a low-level hunter. Betty and he had probably been raised very differently. What's with all the spectators? He changed the sensitive subject as he undressed. As Alpha, Ryota always stood on the sidelines during pack challenges. Wasn't unusual for him to be here, but the sharp scent of tension was unexpected. The Alpha circled Betty as if trying to puzzle her out. You do smell like shifter, he whispered. Ken changed shape to his beast form and stretched his hamstrings. There wasn't such a big crowd the last time I fought Joshua. What's going on? Ryota jerked as if startled. Why do you think it's Joshua? Ken halted mid-stretch. Who then? Chris Jenkins. Betty pointed across the fighting cage where an unfamiliar shifter and beast form glared death in Ken's direction. The Alpha of Riverbend? He spun to face Ryota. Explain. His father wouldn't sanction a challenge like this unless there was a good reason. Why would he fight for a beta position? It's not about hierarchy. Ryota stared at Betty. It's about her. Betty's heart skipped a beat. Now she understood why her old pack was in the crowd. Ryota tapped her jaw closed. Your Alpha showed up on my doorstep 3 hours ago. I couldn't talk him out of the challenge, my dear. He's not my Alpha. She stepped forward. He's never been or will be. She couldn't believe he just said that. What an asshole. She didn't care if he was Ken's father. He hadn't any right to suggest that she was part of the Riverbend pack. Ryota tilted his inhumanly beautiful head and caught her gaze. He drilled into her with his Alpha power as if examining her soul. She turned away, not wanting to be looked at as if she were some strange bug. Ken stood rockstill by the entrance to the fighting arena. His glare an arrow. Across the challenge cage. He stepped forward, claws extended, lips pulled back and exposing sharp teeth. His Alpha caught him with one arm. Not yet, son. He can't have her. I'm going to tear his heart out and eat it. Ken's chest heaved as if he couldn't catch his breath. Don't bother. According to Chris, Betty already did that. Ryota's icy glare never left her and grew arctic hard. Sweat trickled down her spine. I don't understand. How could she? Her heart beat so hard she felt dizzy. She leaned her hand against the wall. Chris is challenging Ken for you. Ryota didn't have to say the word since his tone said it all. A half-breed. I'm not some cow for trade on the market. She grabbed Ken by the hand. Fuck him. Chris doesn't own me. I pick who I want. Ken didn't budge. His focus centered on her ex-boyfriend who hadn't once reached out to her since she'd been exiled from her old pack. Had Chris lost his mind? Ryota kept his attention on her. What? She shouted at her future father-in-law, who could rip her head off with one hand. What do you want from me? How is this my fault? Chris and I dated for a few months before I was termed human. He had a bigger, better future without me and I didn't want anything to do with shifters. I had the fucking right to leave. Nobody owns me. Not even Ken. Ken's ears were laid back. She wasn't sure if he heard her. Most humans thought challenges barbaric, but they didn't understand. Shifters weren't humans who could change shape. They were those animals that could look human. Their needs were not the same. They felt things and acted different. And Ken, if I took him away from you? Ryota asked, still holding back her soulmate from rushing across the fighting arena with one arm. Before she could think, she snarled and threw herself at Newport's Alpha. The crowd roared. Ryota held her gently by the throat, now holding both her and Ken. What a pair they made. Howling, she shook her head clear and retreated. My apologies, Alpha. Always best practice not to antagonize the biggest monster in the room. Yet, Ken belonged to her and Ryota had threatened to take him away. She couldn't be held completely responsible. Accepted. Ryota stroked Ken's muzzle. I approve of your choice. He slapped him playfully on the cheek. Go win your mate. The Alpha signaled someone in. The control booth and the cage doors opened simultaneously. Ken threw himself forward, running on all fours and clashed with Chris in the center. No. She raced after him. The cage doors closed and locked. She slammed into Its arms extended through the bars. They wouldn't open again until there was a victor. Ryota pulled her away, half carrying her off the stage. Stop this, he hissed. In her ear. She twisted in his arms. I can't. He gave her a little shake as if admonishing a pup for bad behavior. You think I want to lose my only child? Only then did she catch the hint of fear in his scent. If I don't agree to this challenge, they'll only find each other on the streets. How much damage would they do then? He plopped her onto a chair next to him. At least here I can control them from killing each other. She squirmed in her chair, hands gripping the edge of her seat so she wouldn't charge the cage again. Why now? I've been in Newport for years. Why is Chris trying to claim me? It makes no sense. Betty hadn't been with Ken long enough to know if he had any weaknesses, but Chris' left knee had always given him trouble, ever since he'd broken it as a cub. He hit it well, but the joint had never healed right. Ryota sat with his legs crossed and arms resting on the chair. Suit immaculate. And midnight dark hair perfectly combed. He didn't look like he'd just restrained both her and Ken a couple minutes ago. It makes perfect sense. He tossed her a quick glance, as if afraid to miss a second of action in the cage. Think about it. Like she could think while her mate fought her ex-boyfriend. She dropped her head in her hands. Don't do that. Ryota snapped. You're Ken's mate. Act it. The whole stadium is watching you. She jerked her head up and forced her tense muscles to relax. Felt like wrestling a group of squirrels, but eventually her body molded to the chair. Better. What's changed recently? The alpha asked. She blinked. Ken claimed me as a soulmate. The holy grail of all shifters' dreams. He almost sounded wistful. That or the noise from the crowd affected her hearing. And there wasn't enough oxygen in the stadium. Why weren't people passing out? Because she was on the verge. Only shifters have soulmates. She blinked. Again. Chris has accepted me as a shifter. And like it or not, you have a birth pack. As your alpha, he has first rights. Bullshit. The armrest she gripped squealed under the strain of her hold. She consciously loosened her grip. It's within our rights, soulmates or not. He leveled his intense gaze at her. But none of that will matter unless you change shape. Otherwise they're just fighting over a corpse. You would kill me? No, I love my son too much. But other packs will. They'd risk crossing my territory to kill you, so whatever is blocking you, fix it. Sure thing. Like she just hadn't let a dragon beat her to solve the problem. She'd snap her fingers and get unblocked. Chapter 21. Betty belonged to him. Would always be his. Ken ducked under Chris' claw. Swipe. She might have been with him, but that was ancient history. Chris just had to accept the fact. The next swipe turned into a punch that sent Ken staggering against the cage wall. He shook his dizzy head. Nobody had rung his bell like that except Ryota. The deafening noise of the crowd suffocated his senses. He moved to the left. Always keep moving. He heard Ryota's voice from a distant memory when Ken had trained as a young wolf. A moving target was much harder to hit. Ken's head cleared in time for him to duck another aggressive strike. Damn. Chris was fast. No wonder he'd made alpha so young. Still, he wasn't as fast as Ryota, who Ken sparred with weekly. He twisted back the way he came, kicking Chris in the kidney. The Riverbend alpha went down onto his hands and knees with a grunt. Why are you trying to take her away from me? Ken couldn't keep out the snarl in his voice. Chris jumped to his feet. Because you can't keep her safe. With you she'll die. Like a ghost, he slipped past Ken's defenses to land consecutive punches to his ribs. Hammer-like fists pounded against his bones until he heard a crack. He cried out and fell away. She won't die. He gasped for air. I won't let anything happen to her. His right side burned and he coughed up blood. Popped lung? Chris didn't want to beat him. He wanted Ken dead. You declared her your soulmate when she can't shift. Every shifter in the country will be crying for her blood. You should have kept your mouth shut. Chris sidestepped Ken's counterattack. The Riverbend alpha's left knee twisted and he tried to hide his grimace of pain. As an apex predator, part of his training had been spotting weakness in others and how to exploit them. Being a dominant hunter was 50% strength and speed, the other 50 was knowing how and when to use them. At this point, Ken's problem wasn't skill, it was inability to catch his breath. Only one side of his chest worked. Spots developed in his vision and his lungs were on fire from both injuries. Accelerated healing wasn't always a benefit. Trying to land a punch while ribs tried to rearrange their order was impossible. He could barely lift his arms. Spectators stood in the stands, the floor trembled with their screams. Behind Chris' looming form, Ken spotted Betty's pale face. Her dark hair was a wild storm cloud as she jumped to her feet. Ryota caught her by the waist, keeping her from leaping against the cage wall. Her red lips opened as she shouted something he couldn't hear over all the noise, but he read her lips. She shouted his name over and over. Not Chris. His. Clutching his sides to ease the pain, Ken ducked Chris' next strike. Claws grazed his spine. Sharp pain in his chest made it impossible to breathe, yet he managed to press close to Chris and use the heel of his foot to kick the knee. The other shifter favored. A satisfying crack reached Ken's ears before Chris' howl masked all other sounds. Ken stumbled until he hit the cage wall. It held him up for a couple of seconds before his knees turned to water and he sank to the floor. Chris lay on the floor across the ring, his leg bent at a wrong angle. Claws extended, he crawled toward Ken, then his face contorted in agony. The alpha's tongue lolled out from the side of his muzzle as he panted. He paused to heave. Ken swallowed with a mouth gone dry. I'll die before I'll let you win, he managed to say between gasps. The cage wall supporting his back shook with the impact of the door opening. Metal against metal clanged, even over the roar of the crowd. Ryota strode across the challenge mat. He held Betty with an arm around her waist. Tears slid down her face as she reached out both arms toward him. Her mouth moved, but he still couldn't hear her. He couldn't hear anything but the thready beat of his heart. The cage spun slowly. Ryota held a microphone in his hand as he announced something. Ken wished he could hear it. Chris' prone body had shifted to human form. He lay on his stomach, naked and unconscious. Ken's ribs didn't hurt anymore, but he still couldn't catch his breath. Ryota shoved the microphone in Betty's face. It's a draw. Choose a winner, he ordered. She blinked, her vision clear of tears. Choose, damn it. Ryota looked pale, his gaze darting to Ken's slumped form against the fighting cage wall. Ken Birch is the winner, she stammered. Her voice echoed in the arena. The crowd responded with both cheers and boos. She fisted the microphone. Riverbend Pack, come gather what's left of your alpha. She dropped the mic. Ryota gave her a fast nod of approval. Ken sat slumped to the right, staring in her direction. He looked wrong. She walked slowly toward him. He seemed injured, but she couldn't see any wounds. She knelt by his head and stroked his thick fur. You won. You can shift now. Can't. He was short of breath. Why not? Her voice cracked and she sniffed. Ryota. She smelled blood and combed through his fur with her fingers, looking for the wound. The alpha was at her side instantly, hands probing his adopted son's body. No. His son's body. They might not be blood, but the worry lining the alpha's face was of a father who loved his child with all his heart. Only one side of his chest is rising. I think his lung is punctured. Shouldn't he be able to heal that? She swiped the wetness from her face and dried her hands on her jeans. Heal it, yes. Not reinflate it. She roared, tendons popping in her neck and jaws, fingers stiff with fury. These types of wounds were fatal for their kind if not treated quickly, and she hadn't a clue how to help. She had just found Ken. He completed her like a lost puzzle piece. He was everything she dreamed of being: responsible, successful, dependable, perfect. And now fate would rip him away. She twisted around, narrowing her eyes on the Riverbend Pack members as they tended their alpha's broken leg. Not fate. Chris. She bared her teeth. If Ken died, so would he. Ryota cupped her face, pulling her attention from the others in the cage. His alpha power calmed the feral beast within her, trying to tear free. I need the medical kit in the prep room. Okay, she stammered, trying to hold back a sob. Jumping to her feet, she raced to the prep room. Newport hunters had gathered outside the door and she parted them with a few desperate shoves. Inside the room she came to a sudden halt. Where the fuck was it? She hadn't asked Ryota. Nothing obvious stood out. She yanked open empty lockers and searched the cupboard under the sink. Where would they store it? Crouched, she took a quick look around and spotted a duffel bag under one of the benches lining the wall. She scurried on hands and knees, pulling it out. Inside she found the medical supplies. Yes. She wiped her wet cheeks again. Flipping tears were blinding her. Clutching the bag to her chest, she ran back to Ryota's side. Ken's hand moved toward her. Incomprehensible words fell from her lips. Things like stay, no and please. Stay. They didn't mean anything in that order, but the love in Ken's eyes said. He understood. She rested his head in her lap, her tears dripping onto his fur. She'd barely ever cried, but she was making up for a lifetime of tears in minutes. Ryota held a huge syringe with a big-ass needle in his hand. Using his thumb, he felt around Ken's collarbone. What are you doing? She managed to string words together to make sense. Saving him. Ryota punctured Ken's chest and drew back on the plunger to create a negative pressure to reinflate the lung. Ken gasped, his chest rising properly as his lung reinflated. He coughed and sat up, pulling her onto his lap. He held her tight as he gulped for air and coughed some more. The quiet crowd exploded with cheers. She pressed her face into his chest. I almost lost you. She clung to his broad shoulders, hugging him so hard her back ached. Don't do that again. He buried his nose in her hair and inhaled. No one will take you away. Not Chris or the other packs. He paused. Or my own alpha. Sit still for a minute longer while your lung seals itself. Ryota knelt next to them. He offered Ken a hand. She still has time to learn to change shape. I'm feared enough that the other packs will hesitate to trespass, but that won't last forever. He helped Ken up and she slid to her feet. The alpha gave her a small smile. You cured my doubts about your being soulmates. With another nod, he straightened his suit, then exited the challenge ring. She hugged Ken close. He didn't need her support, but he was going to get it anyway. Chris Hunters had apparently set his leg while they had been saving Ken's life. His intense dark gaze drank her in from head to toe. With a little help, Chris managed to get to his feet and limp over on his splinted leg. Ken tensed as if ready to pounce. Chris extended his hand. I came here to save her. He waited, his gaze still wandering to her. Ken gripped his hand tight. She could hear knuckles pop. She doesn't need saving. Betty shook her head in disbelief. She can speak for herself. She stepped between the two shifters, Chris in his human form and Ken still in his beast. What the fuck, Chris? How did this play out in your mind that you would think I'd ever come back? He had the courtesy to look ashamed, a blush creeping along his cheeks. He ducked his head and waited until his hunters backed out of the cage, giving them a small amount of privacy. I would have married you if you had stayed. She slapped her forehead. No pack would allow their alpha to marry a human. You know that. He shrugged. Maybe I would have quit being alpha. We'll never know now. He limped away, exiting the challenge cage. Her jaw dropped open. After all these years, he still carried a torch for her? What they had experienced was puppy love. She and Ken had the real deal. Maybe one day Chris would find it. I almost feel sorry for him. Ken licked her face, chin to forehead. Almost. You're better. She wiped her face clean. Stop licking me. I'm going to drown in your spit. He waved to the remaining crowd. A few cheered his name. Someone gave him the finger and shouted, You suck, Birch. Ken snorted. Can't be popular with everyone, I guess. He let her out the way. They came. Inside the prep room, he shifted to his human form. The change looked slow and painful. He slumped onto a bench, skin covered in a sheen of sweat. He kicked my ass. Betty helped him dress. I wonder who would win between him and Ryota. Ken rubbed his bruised sides. Those injuries must have been real deep to still be present. Ryota. She had briefly felt his power tonight. Scary stuff. She buttoned Ken's shirt. His gaze riveted on her as she made sure she had them done right. I've never had someone dress me. He stroked her hair. His hollow tone broke her heart. He'd been an orphan until 10. Alone. Those things didn't go away after adoption, and Ken had only had an adopted father. No one will ever take you away from me. He kept repeating this as if trying to convince himself. He gripped her shoulders. I wouldn't force you to stay, but as long as I draw breath, don't worry about being stolen. I don't care what Ryota or my pack decides. I will stay at your side no matter if you want to leave Newport or not. She laid a gentle kiss on his cheek. I'm not going anywhere. He'd become an integral part of her life in such a short amount of time. Now that she knew how it felt to be truly loved by a mate, she couldn't continue without him. I'm so sorry about Chris. The last thing I expected was for him to challenge you. I didn't know he still had feelings for me. In all those years after leaving the pack, he hadn't once called me. Being a soulmate means you are a shifter. That changes everything. I still can't shift. I believe in you. He returned a gentle kiss on her cheek. Let's go home. He handed her the keys to his car. You drive. He pushed himself onto his feet slowly and limped to the exit. She moved to his side, but he shook his head, refusing her support. Once on the other side of the threshold and into public view, Ken's limp vanished. No weakness. He strode into the crowd. From the mass scent and cheers, she would guess they were all Newport pack. Her stomach flip-flopped and she paused outside the group as they swallowed him. A chant began. Ken, Ken, Ken. Ryota seemed to materialize next to her. They love him. I can see that. You can't keep him all to yourself. Do you know what entails being a dominance mate? The pack must come first. My parents taught me well. She met his stare for a hot moment. I can. Chapter 22. Ken's car drove through traffic like a hot knife through butter. Betty didn't own a car. Her bank account would have a seizure if she even dreamed about it, but she missed being behind the wheel. Her mate clutched the chicken bar over his head. So, anyone ever explain what the speed limit signs mean? She gave him her best wolfish grin. You only live once. Eyes on the road. I want to live to see our grandchildren. She did her best to keep her smile. Hands sweaty, they slipped a little on the steering wheel. You want children? The loaded question hung in the air. Betty sensed him hold his breath before he asked, Do you? I asked first. Obviously he wanted children. He had just mentioned seeing his future grandchildren. Couldn't have one without the other. Betty hadn't dared dream of starting a family. She barely could take care of herself, let alone a little shifter. He cleared his throat. I've never had a family. I mean, besides Pac and Ryota. I want what I missed out on as a kid. Is that a yes? Yes, he whispered. His gaze focused on the windshield. Lots and lots of kids. I even thought of doing what Ryota did and adopt if I couldn't find a mate. She gripped his hand. With the help of a mate like Ken, a family didn't seem like an impossible task. Heck, she ran a rescue. She loved taking care of creatures. How different could babies be? Yes, I think I do. He set her hand back on the steering wheel. Let's survive this drive first so we can practice making babies when we get home. In his condition, she didn't think sex was the best idea. She hadn't been at the rescue all day and had ignored her parents. They'd been taking care of her animals and volunteers. She hoped the place hadn't burned down, but she couldn't leave Ken alone, and she didn't have an extra bed for them at her place. Can you pull my phone out of my pocket and call my dad? I need to check in. Ken did as she asked. Mrs. Newman? I'll pass you to, I'm fine. Yes, I'm really okay. TV? They sometimes televise them. I'm glad you watched. He gave Betty big round eyes as if pleading for help. Tell her I'm spending the night. Betty grinned, enjoying Ken's discomfort. He wanted family. That meant he got hers as well. Betty will be spending the night at my house. Do either of you need anything? He was so sweet to her mother. Betty's tooth ached. Shopping? You filled her fridge. I wasn't aware it was empty. His eyes now narrowed and lasered onto Betty. Dust bunnies. She cringed. Her money problems were her own. He didn't need to know about them. I'll be fine. It looked worse on television, I promise. Night, Mrs. Newman. He hesitated as if listening. Okay, Mrs. Mom. He hung up and then wiped a hand down his face. They filled your fridge and dog biscuit canisters. She thought you'd lost weight and is furious you let things get this bad without telling them. Betty pulled into his driveway, still avoiding eye contact. How bad are things? He poured the pack's power into his glare, triggering her shifter instincts. Answer me. Don't beta wolf me. You're not allowed to do that to your mate. Yes, I am. Your pack and my responsibility. I wouldn't let anyone in the pack starve. It's bad, okay? Happy now. She straightened her spine and met his dominant stare, not backing down like she had with Ryota. Ken might be the pack's beta, But he was her mate. They were equals in her eyes. I'm not bringing anything into this mating except debt and strays. He pulled her out of her seatbelt and dragged her onto his lap. You bring everything. His kiss was desperate and demanding as he tangled his fingers into her wild hair. I was once a stray. You don't know the depth of respect I have for what you do. It's easy to make money, but it's hard as hell to give your heart to the unwanted. She cupped his handsome, chiseled face in her hands. You are not unwanted. This gorgeous wolf was hers forever. I saw how your pack loves you. Your father is devoted to you. You're not unwanted. She kissed his forehead. Never again. I know. He gave her a sad smile. But the feeling never really goes away. And she would spend the rest of her life making it fade if it was the last thing she did. He deserved better, but he had gotten her instead. Let's go. Inside. She crawled out of the passenger side. Ken followed a little slower. Did I mention your mother suggested a massage? How kind of you to offer. Betty unlocked the front door and was tackled by dogs. The ground broke her fall and one of the heaviest pups stepped on her kidney. She tried to give them commands, but every time she opened her mouth, one of them tried to slip her the tongue. Ken grinned, looming over her supine form. He petted his untrained pack of bullies. Who's a good dog? He scratched ears until the rabble returned. Inside. Betty rolled over. We need to do something about their greeting etiquette. I think it's adorable. Ken still moved so stiffly. That meant his healing energy hadn't taken care of his sore muscles since it was still focused on internal injuries. Ken was a strong shifter, but Chris was an alpha. She couldn't even think about what would have happened if Chris had won the challenge instead of it ending in a draw. They would have needed Trixie's tranquilizer gun to sedate her before she returned to Riverbend Pack. She refused his help and got to her feet. I'll draw you a hot bath. She wiped the dog slobber off her face absent-mindedly. Where is the bathroom? Hot water helped with the pain. Her mother used to do the same for her after she'd fought school challenges. Ken hobbled into a massive stainless steel kitchen, followed by his canine groupies, and pulled a roasted turkey out of the fridge. He pointed to the back of the house. Master bathroom is off my bedroom. Want a sandwich? He tossed each dog a slice of meat, then a bit into a leg, crunching bones and all. Roasted bones can get caught in your throat. Oh no, she hadn't. She just became her mom. He rolled his eyes and took another mouthful. Mayo on yours? Yes, and I'm here if you need the Heimlich. Shifters were experts on choking. When they were hungry, it was like their logical forebrains fell asleep. Every shifter experienced a bone or chunk of meat stuck in their windpipe at least once in their lives. If not for the Heimlich, choking would be the leading cause of death in their kind. She gasped when entering Ken's bathroom of luxurious splendor. Oh dear, she was in heaven. She hopped in place for a second, then pulled out her phone to take a picture of the whirlpool tub. She sent it to Trixie, then filled the tub with steaming water. It was bigger than her whole leaky bathroom at the rescue. Not a second later, Trixie texted her back asking about the toilet. Betty rolled her eyes and took a selfie while sitting on it. Trixie sent her back a pic of her grossed-out expression, followed by a reminder of Betty's appointment with the company's representative tomorrow about the eviction. Ken strode into the bathroom, sandwich in hand. He served it on a lovely white plate. The edges of the porcelain didn't even have any chips. He eyed her phone while she sat on the toilet, still dressed. What are you doing? Scaring Trixie. He snorted and handed her the plate. I have to go into the office tomorrow. But I was wondering if we could meet for lunch. Sure. Hot dogs in the park? She took a huge bite of the triple-decker he'd made her. She appreciated that he hadn't held back on the portions. I was thinking about something nicer. How about Japanese at my grandmother's place? Betty's stomach dropped, leaving her bite stuck mid-swallow. She worked her dry throat and forced the food down. Ken handed her a glass of water. It would be polite to meet them before the mating ceremony. He gave her a shy smile. They're much more laid back than Ryota, and Grandma makes the best miso soup from scratch. Sounds great. She poured enthusiasm in her reply. Ken could get through meeting her parents, then she could pull this off as well. She took a mental note to Google miso soup. She'd never eaten Japanese food before. Watching Betty consume the sandwich gave him bone-deep satisfaction. She was accepting his care more and more. They were becoming a couple. When Ken had first entered the bathroom, he had spotted the silly picture text on her phone before she hid it. He loved this side of her. Everything in his life was so structured. He hadn't realized that fun was missing from his life until she'd stepped into that void. The night on the paddleboat had only proved it. She'd turned a disaster into one of the most special moments of his life. She thought she brought nothing to their mating. She was the heart and soul of everything he owned were just things. If one lacked anything between them, it was him. He hoped one day she would feel comfortable enough to send him silly picture texts, or sexy ones, maybe both at the same time. Why are you smiling like that? He shrugged. No reason. Yeah. She dragged out the word, making it long and clear she didn't believe him. She set her empty plate on the counter, totally unfazed that they just had dinner in the bathroom. She stretched and patted her stomach. We better soak before the tryptophan kicks in. I would hate for us to fall asleep and drown. Stripping, she took her time revealing her delicious painted body. A man could only have sinful thoughts when exposed to those curves and perfect skin. His hardening cock agreed. Baby, I can't imagine ever sleeping while you're naked. She dipped her toe in the tub and adjusted the heat. You're just going to watch. I had thought this whole bath thing would be more interactive. He wanted to be rigorously interactive with her again, but he should heal and conserve his energy. It wasn't unknown for someone to challenge a beta the day after a fight. Normally he wouldn't worry. He healed fast even by shifter standards, but Chris had almost killed him. Joshua was probably sharpening his claws right now. If he lost his position, he'd have less power to protect Betty, and she was everything. Yet even against his better judgment to rest, his fingers worked of their own free will to undo the buttons of his shirt. Fluttered to his feet. Betty sucked in a breath and brushed her fingers over the bruises on his ribs. Oh baby, come here. She gently led him into the tub and helped him sit on the marble edge. He didn't need her assistance to undress, but it felt real. Nice having her hands on him. Let me take care of you. She stretched for a face towel on a shelf over the tub. This placed temptation right in view. He prided himself on strong willpower. However, he couldn't keep from caressing her breasts even if both hands had been broken. She paused, eyes closed as he stroked her soft skin. You're cheating. Who said I play fair? He ran his hands along her bare flanks, admiring the lines of her body. I wish people would leave us alone for a few months. Months? She giggled. The sound a balm on his wounded soul. He nuzzled the space between the soft globes. To give us time to know each other. My mother would find us even if we hid in the troll caves of Mexico. I'd rather sunbathe on beaches than hide in troll caves. He trailed kisses lower, pulling her to straddle his lap. The tub will overflow. I have insurance. She tasted like sunshine and blue sky and freedom. He cupped her ass, pulling her closer. She ran her fingers through his hair, tugging his head back. Finish. Undressing, lover. She slid free of his grasp and shut off the water, then stepped into the bath. I've never been in such a huge tub, unless you count pools. He chuckled and stepped out of his pants. I needed something that I could fit in without folding in half. Soaking after a hard run was his guilty pleasure. Come here. She wrung the face cloth of excess water and wiped the dried blood from his chest where Ryota had stabbed the needle. There wasn't much. Even the puncture mark had vanished. You scared me, she whispered. I don't ever want to watch you fight again. Ken finally noticed the worry lines around her eyes, the strain of emotion hovering right behind them. I won. That was all that mattered in challenges. You almost died. She turned away from him. He caught her shoulder and turned her back. Challenges are part of my life. I'm beta. Anyone striving for dominance will always come after me until I'm alpha. I'm the main target of any dominant wolf wanting power in Newport. I'm the safer target. Safer. She tilted her head. He kept forgetting that she hadn't been raised like him, that her father wasn't an upper echelon hunter. I'm the prime target. The hunter wanting to become an alpha will target the beta first. If they can beat the beta, then they'll focus on the alpha. That's dominant wolf strategy 101. Chris jumped that tactic. He went straight after the alpha. That's why so many of us think of him as a wild card. He'll either burn bright and die, or he'll grow to be incredible. Ken shrugged, not wanting to think of her ex-boyfriend. Newport has an unusual dynamic as well. Father-son leadership. He nodded. He didn't doubt that Ryota had planned that. From day one his father had groomed him for a position of power. Tension between Beta and Alpha placed the pack on edge. With them both happy in their positions, they could focus on making their home safe and strong for their people. Newport was unique for wolf shifters. She took a deep, shaky breath. So you fight often? I'm very familiar with the challenge arena. He chuckled. With less of a crowd than tonight. She pressed her hand to his chest, right over his heart. It's not funny. He joined her in the tub. Sometimes it is. I was once challenged by a rabbit shifter. That guy could leap over my head. He sank into the hot water and pulled her on top of him like a blanket. She pressed her face to his chest. He wanted to be Beta to a wolf pack? No, he wanted retribution for a slight to his honor. They're a touchy race. I'd been covered in bruises by the end of the fight. My ribs ached for weeks. Not from a beating but from laughing. It was hard to focus when a grown man hopped around the cage like a jackrabbit. His respect for those shifters had gone up that day. You're making this up. She giggled though. He ran his hand along the curve of her spine. Nope. Ask my father. He wasn't as amused as me. No. His father had been furious that Ken had agreed to the challenge. If he had lost to a rabbit, his reputation would have suffered and challenges would have been booked for weeks. Ken hadn't known how fierce rabbits could fight. Apparently his father had. This is going to be harder than I thought. He blinked. What do you mean? Being a Beta's soulmate. She kissed his chest and ran her hand over his abdomen, going lower and lower. His breath hitched as she stroked him. Yes, well, there are compensations. Oh really? She straddled him. Like what? Her hot breath caressed his ears. And he melted under her slight weight. Anything you want. Her laugh was husky and mischievous. I just want you. She slid him inside her. With a groan, he held her against him, his hands moving to her hips. He anchored her body to his, letting her lead him into a slow rhythm. She sucked in a breath as she pushed him deeper. It felt impossible not to take command. His nature was to lead, but with Betty, he would follow. She bit down on her lower lip, making little noises of pleasure. He leaned in to kiss that lower lip. His mate. His Betty. His forever. He slid his hand between their bodies, touching her slick heat and rubbing that sweet spot. The air hissed between her teeth. Oh, Ken. Her eyes closed and she tilted her head back. Ken gritted his teeth, because her reaction to his touch was making it hard to stay in control. He wanted nothing more than to set her passion on fire. Make her beg for more. Make her forget any other man who had touched her. Her movements sped up, hips rolling and grinding against his fingers. Faster. And faster. Short of breath, her grip on his shoulders became rougher. Nails digging in his flesh. Their bodies met in fierce desire. Water splashed over the edge of the tub. They were carried along in ecstasy. Betty seemed senseless with need, and he matched her every moan. He didn't care if the whole neighborhood heard them. She cried out his name over and over. He felt it the same moment she did, so wild his entire body shook with the force of their climax. She slumped over his body, arms wrapped around his neck and face buried against his throat. The only sound was their harsh breathing and the distant bark of dogs in the yard. I want you. I don't care about the other stuff. Just you. He smiled at the ceiling. I can give more. She'd never want for anything. He would always make sure she had food, shelter, and safety. I don't need it. Never have. Just you. She nipped his skin with her little sharp teeth. I need you. Chapter 23. Dressed in yesterday's clothes, Betty hurried out of Ken's bedroom. She'd woken to an empty bed. No sign of Ken. She hoped he hadn't gone to work, because she needed a ride home. Her dad could pick her up, but she only had a vague recollection of where she was. Ken had given her directions as she'd driven last night, but she'd been so worried about him she hadn't paid much attention to details like exit number or street names. She could picture her dad aimlessly driving, calling out her name, in hopes to find the house. The scent of toast and butter reached her nose and drew her to his kitchen, where Ken was slicing fresh strawberries on the butcher block island, shirtless. The smile he aimed in her direction eased a knot in her gut. A girl could get accustomed to this kind of treatment in view. She'd had her fair share of uncomfortable mornings after, where it was hard to make eye contact with the guy she brought home. This wasn't one of those. The whole mate thing was nice, better than nice. Ken's unwavering affection gave her life foundation. Everything else was falling apart, but she could rely on him to have her back. It seemed like he planned to stay. She couldn't beat him away, and that was fine with her. He stopped chopping and stalked around the kitchen island toward her. Her heart raced as his shoulders rolled with every step. If she was his prey, she'd let him catch her. She gave him a crooked smile. Hell, she'd let him catch her anytime. Good morning, he purred. Before she could respond, he swept her in his arms. With a ravenous tear her panties off now kind of kiss, she clutched his shoulders and wrapped him in a tight hold. He stumbled against the table and was pinned against the edge. She ran her hands over his fine chest. She could be late for the meeting, right? Or at worst reschedule for another day. Ken's phone dinged, then hers did. They jerked apart, exchanging puzzled looks, and then separated to check their screens. He sighed. Just my assistant Benny, sending reminders for today's meetings. He's new to the pack. His last beta was a real asshole, and Ryota thought it would do him some good if Benny worked for me, so he could discover what it's like to have a good beta protect him. She smirked as his chest puffed out. Her text was from Trixie saying she'd be around to bail her out of jail if she lost her shit when speaking with her next landlord. She was awesome. Ken returned to the kitchen. Coffee. Big cup. Black. Only the soulless drink it black. He set a steaming cup on the island that said, the tiger and lion may be more powerful, but the wolf does not perform in the circus. Next time she had enough money for a tattoo, she'd use this quote. The soulless have no need for coffee. She pulled up a stool and watched him put together a professional-looking plate of steamed rice. She leaned forward as he added a fish and pickled vegetables. Different. I have some nori or natto to add to the rice if you want. He must have noticed her confusion. Traditional Japanese breakfast. So no Captain Pops when you were growing up? She couldn't afford it, but she loved cereal. Sometimes Ryota would treat me to pancakes. He winked. We ate like ninjas. That's how he got me to try everything. I love it now. They ate quietly, food being a religion among shifters. He at least let her use a fork. She foresaw a lot of adjustments in their future. For one, she didn't plan on ever becoming a ninja. She handed him her empty plate. That was quite good. I wasn't sure I'd like fish for breakfast. He grinned sheepishly between bites. His plate had contained twice as much as hers. I'm glad you liked it. I usually make fish or eggs. I need the protein to keep me going until my second breakfast at the office. She threw back her head with a laugh. I wouldn't want you to waste away or anything. Leaning across the island, she caught his gaze. I've been thinking. Ken raised an eyebrow. Since things didn't exactly go well with Angie, I was wondering if Owen could help me with shifting. Ken had said he couldn't sense any of her magic when she tried to shift, and Angie had mentioned Owen could see magic. Maybe he had the ability to fix the problem? Ken choked on his mouthful and struggled to swallow it. He coughed. Why? She raced around to the other side of the kitchen island and patted him on the back as he continued to cough up rice. He helped Angie. Makes perfect sense to me. Unless you think he'll eat me. There had been a recent rumor that he tried to make a meal of the alpha not long ago. Her mate finally stopped choking. Honestly, I'm not sure. Things between Owen and the pack are rocky. His mood depends on the phase of the moon, which direction the wind is blowing, and if he rolled out of bed on the right side. He shook his head. I'm not willing to risk you. It's illegal for him to eat people. She crossed her arms. Seriously, every other shifter in the city used the supermarket. Why couldn't he? Who would arrest him? Even Ryota treads carefully around the dragon. You let him drive your car. I thought you were friends. Like I would say no? This guy keeps a pet vampire in his dungeon. I'm friends with Angie. He sighed and kissed her forehead before squeezing her in a spine-cracking hug. Let's look at other options first. I heard a voodoo witch moved Into the magic neighborhood. Maybe she'll have a spell. Like that didn't sound slightly dangerous. I don't like magic users. What if she sacrifices something? We could eat it afterwards? Ken. She'd never been into the whole hunting thing that some shifters thrived on. Not when there was meat already prepared at the store. Especially the processed stuff like hot dogs. He released her and strode to the bedroom. Are you ready for tomorrow? What's tomorrow? She racked her memory for some clue. The pet adoption and orphanage fundraiser. He came out dressed in a stunning navy blue suit and crisp white shirt with the collar open. Oh yeah. Oh baby, that suit might as well be men's lingerie the way it made her tingle. She couldn't wait for tonight to peel him out of it. Nice and slow. Wait, what? Shit. I didn't forget. Yes, she had. Do I need to bring a table or a canopy or something? She'd been focused on the eviction meeting. Too many things going on when she was a one-thing-at-time type of person. I've attended these types of affairs, but I've never had a spot booth. She didn't own any equipment, hence the reason she'd never done a public adoption event. I have application forms and pens. I'll have my assistant arrange all the big equipment. Just bring the animals. Water and food. Got it. She texted Trixie. Betty needed to borrow her work truck to transport all the dogs separately from the cats in the morning. They could do it really early before Trixie ended her night shift. Damn. Betty failed at adulting. She should have made these arrangements before now. What if Trixie had other plans? Her best friend responded with a thumbs up and Betty kissed her phone. Anything I should know about? I'm getting jealous. He looked over her shoulder. Okay, we're ready. I'm ready. She wiped her sweaty palms on her jeans. Right. After her meeting, she'd spend the afternoon preparing. She caught a glimpse of her and Ken in the mirror that hung over an antique table. Betty, sporting yesterday's thrift store fashions and matching black eyes. Ken sharp and elegant and totally healed. She looked around his immaculate home. One of these things was not like the other. He wanted her to live here. She tried to picture life in the suburbs and her mind seized. She rubbed her temples. Too much to think about. Worrying about. Things like a home just had to wait until she found her rescue's families. Headache? He asked. I'll be fine. After she had a full makeover and a job upgrade. Lots of stress. He took over her brain massage. Honeymoon. She gave him a slow blink. Anywhere you want to go that's shifter-friendly. I'll make you forget all your stress. I don't have a passport. Not all countries allowed shifters to have open lives. Most did. She wouldn't want to visit those other places anyway. I'll take care of it. Just pick a place. His gaze wandered along her body. Maybe someplace with bikinis. Yesterday had been the longest day of her life between Angie and the vampire and Chris challenge. She could use a vacation. The farthest she'd ever traveled was to Newport. Where could they go? Someplace tropical that she'd only secretly dreamed about. Hawaii. She wanted to see a volcano. She had heard the dragons who lived there gave fire dancing performances. Anything for you. Why did she worry about silly clothes and furniture? Ken obviously didn't care about those things. He just wanted her. She stroked her hands over his suit jacket and made an appreciative noise. Let's go take care of business so we can make plans. Mating ceremony first. He gave her a quick kiss. Ken dropped Betty off at the rescue. She watched his car turn the corner. The scent of her father reached her nose. She didn't turn around. Thanks for watching the place, Dad. He had moved silently behind her. No trouble. He grunted as if sucker punched when he finally saw her face. Who's been using you as a punching bag? The growl in his voice made it deep as gravel. If Ken did this, then there's no way. She pressed her hand over his mouth. His face red enough to make a tomato. Jealous. A dragon. She didn't heal as fast as a full-blooded shifter. Ken had looked good as new this morning. It was a good thing Dad hadn't seen her yesterday. She'd been puffier and swollen. Your mother said that the dragon was nice. She was. She tried to help me shift by triggering my survival instincts. Did it work? No. She set the place on fire, so it was cut short. Maybe they should try it again. Angie had barely attacked her. Or she could just have someone else try. Sharpened. I'm not hitting you. Then he spun on his heel. Don't ask your mother to do it either. He held the door open for Betty. Some girl with pink hair dropped off a bunch of portable dog kennels at the butt crack of dawn. What's going on? Plastic dog crates filled her lobby. She didn't know how to repay Trixie. She'd only asked to borrow the truck, but obviously her friend was thinking way ahead of her. Have you anything more to tell me? Dad raised an eyebrow. Oh my goodness. Mom descended the stairs. It looks like a pet store. Exploded in here. Was this all the noise I heard this morning? Dad nodded without moving his gaze from Betty. He might be a low-level hunter, but he did the dad glare well. Mom came to a sudden halt. Elizabeth Newman, what did you do to your face? She let the dragon punch her, hoping it would make her shift. Well, Mom smoothed her hair. I see you inherited your father's sense of judgment. Do you need to see a doctor, dear? No. Betty stared at her shoes, feeling 5 years old all over again. Was Ken aware that you were going to attempt this foolishness? Mom lifted her chin and examined Betty's face.
No, Betty said.
She didn't have time for this. He was more pissed than either of you, so I've already heard the I'm an idiot speech. He hadn't called her that, but it was how she was feeling at present. Fine. Mom gave her a sharp nod. At least one of you has some common sense. Now explain all this. She gestured to the clutter. I'm doing a pet adoption event tomorrow. They didn't know about the eviction notice, and they never would. Ken is organizing a fundraiser at the local orphanage and has given me a spot. Pet adoption day at the orphanage. The words tumbled out so fast she was out of breath. Dad's eyebrow rose and his mouth fell open. Mom clapped her hands. This will be so fun. Finding forever homes. Match making. I love it. How can I help? I have to go to a meeting this morning. I need a change of clothes. While I'm gone, can you match dog and cat to crate to see if I have enough? I also have a few of my own in the shed. If not for family, friends, and Ken, she'd be in the corner rocking by now. She was a blessed person. I'll do the cats. They don't like your father. She winked and went to the cat house. That's what Betty called the space where she housed all the felines. Dad waited until she left. Keep the chihuahua. I'll take her home. She'll kill you. Betty pointed to the cat house. No, she won't. Dad already owned a pit bull, a German shepherd, and a corgi. Mom was outnumbered. She'll try, but she's not strong enough. Betty glanced at the time. Can I borrow your car? I'm going to be late. He rolled his eyes. Don't ding it. Like you could tell if I add any more dings. Her mother had trouble parking. I can. I have a system. He handed over the keys. How do you think I keep track when your mother adds a new dent? Betty rushed to her closet in the apartment above and changed into a pair of khaki pants with a pink blouse that was missing the bottom button. Whatever. The corporate landlord already knew she was broke. She wasn't going there to dazzle with her fashion sense. Second-hand clothes with a hint of dog hair. Bruises on her face and not a dime in her pocket. The company man would take one look at her and either call the cops or evict her tomorrow. Maybe she should have Trixie come along. She was good with people where Betty tended to lose her crap. She'd better keep her shifter instincts in check. No snapping her teeth or growling. As an unofficial rule, humans did business with humans, shifters with shifters. They had different needs and tolerances, not that they didn't cross lines, but she had rented the house as a human. Being around Ken had triggered some of her old habits. She waved goodbye to her parents as she exited the building. Her dad's compact car was parked in front. She plugged in the address of Kenichi Incorporated on her phone's GPS. The building was downtown in the business section. She drove the unfamiliar streets since she never had any reason to be in this part of town. Well-dressed people strode along the sidewalks, determination in their steps. They all seemed so focused, like they had jobs or projects to attend, things to do, meeting to adjourn, teams to bond. Poor them. Their lives and hers were probably equal in stress. The only difference was the source. Her life was falling apart and theirs were taking off. It only took Betty 3 tries to parallel park. She popped money in the meter and hurried to the Kenichi building, the tallest one on the street. Inside the lobby, her steps slowed as her gaze rose to the clear glass wall she had just walked through. Sunlight streamed inside and reflected off a crystal sculpture hanging mid-air above her head. Someone shoved her aside from behind and she caught her balance on a cast iron garden chair. It stood by a fountain, trickling water into a pond filled with Huge orange and white koi fish. She walked toward the reception desk, taking her time. Dark green plants lined the lobby, leaving only narrow paths to follow. Was this place shifter owned? It had that feel. What kind of shifter though? Knowing her luck, they'd be bears. They usually didn't like wolves. At least, in Riverbend they didn't. May I help you? A young woman, who should be gracing fashion magazine covers, instead of being behind a desk, asked. I have a meeting with. She pulled out a slip of paper where Trixie had written the info. Derek Mansfield. The woman smelled like wolf. Maybe this was a mixed shifter venture? Wait. Betty took a deeper breath through her nose. Dirt, water, plants, the receptionist's expensive perfume. Her sense of smell was growing stronger. The receptionist checked her computer screen. Betty Newman? Yes. Mr. Mansfield had a family emergency this morning. We've been trying to accommodate his appointments. If you can have a seat by the koi pond, I'll see who's available to help. Sure. Betty returned to the garden chair, then spotted a sitting area hidden from the front door by the miniature jungle. The person taking over her case probably was not familiar with her situation. This could be a good thing. She might be able to convince them easier to give her a few more weeks to find the animals' homes. Stomach tied in knots, she sat gingerly on the edge of her seat and chewed her bottom lip. Betty? Are you here to visit? As if conjured by her worries, Ken appeared through the plants, a predator in his territory and looking very pleased. I can give you a tour. Mr. Birch. The receptionist rose and flipped her hair over her shoulder, breasts shoved out. Ms. Newman was waiting for an open spot to meet with Mr. Mansfield's associates. Betty restrained the urge to smack the receptionist and tell her Mr. Birch was taken. You work here? She asked her mate. Suddenly her stomach ache was like a vice grip tearing her apart inside. I thought you worked for Ryota. I do. Kenichi is his last name. I manage investments in some of the major projects. I assumed Ryota's last name was Birch. No, he let me keep my birth name. It's the only thing I have left of my parents. Oh, that makes sense. She eyed his tailored business suit, admiring the fit. Wait a minute. Her eyes narrowed. What kind of projects? Real estate. Development. He paled and guided her deeper into the vegetation toward an elevator. She broke his hold on her arm. Like the one buying all the real estate in my neighborhood. Yes. I can't believe you. Betty planted her hands on her hips. People walking. Other narrow paths through the indoor garden, slow to watch, but she didn't care. Ken had had ample time to tell her the pack had bought her building. You're the one evicting me from my home? Heart in her throat, it grew harder to breathe. Is this why you're helping me with the adoption day? To get me out sooner. Her voice cracked and so did her heart. Traitorous tears spilled over her cheeks. 1 week with her soulmate had turned her into a crybaby. Then she gasped. Are we really soulmates? Was that a lie too? She'd thought she had smelled it. She was sure, but maybe she'd just been wishing real hard. Instead, Ken's mouth fell open. Of course we're soulmates. He reached for her hand, but she retreated from his touch. I found out about the eviction after we met. Offering you a spot at the fundraiser seemed like the perfect solution for both of us. He stalked after her step for step. She stood her ground and snarled, the vicious sound echoing in the large room. And she shoved him away. Or tried to. It was more like she projected herself backwards. It's the perfect solution for you. Did it ever occur to you to stop the eviction? I've paid my rent on time every month, even when I had only enough money for one measly meal a day. She was in no state to listen. Her head spun. Betrayal sizzled in her chest. All she wanted was to lash out, make him hurt as much as she was. She couldn't bear to listen to excuses. Twisting from him, she searched for an escape through the foliage. Keeping this information to himself was worse than a lie. Soulmates didn't hurt each other. She ran aimlessly. Using his superior speed, Ken blocked her path. You're overreacting. She spotted the exit and sidestepped around him. I don't ever want to see you again. Those words left a wound on her soul, but how could she face him again? After he'd taken away her rescue, her dogs, her one true pack, the one that really loved her. Betty. Without a glance over her shoulder, she left her future behind and returned to her father's dinged car. She sat in the driver's seat and leaned her head on the steering wheel. Her vision was too blurred from tears to drive. Just hours ago, she'd been trying to picture how she could fit in Ken's perfect life. It had all been a lie. No wonder she didn't feel like she belonged. She should have listened to her inner voice. Everything had seemed to fall into place too easily. Nothing in life was that easy. She strangled the wheel in her grip, holding on as if it was the only thing keeping her afloat. She'd been heartbroken before when Riverbend Pack had labeled her human, but this was worse. Ken had given her hope. He'd offered her dream on a silver platter, then dumped it on the ground. He'd called her a shifter, made her believe it was all a lie. She couldn't change shape. She couldn't be a shifter. That meant she wasn't his soulmate. She wished she'd never met Ken Birch. She wiped her tears from her cheeks and checked her face in the rearview mirror. Yep, she looked like shit. She took a deep, shaky breath. No amount of crying would solve her problems. Her eviction loomed over her head and she had a rescue filled with pets. She might be homeless in a few days, but they wouldn't be. She would use tomorrow's opportunity at the fundraiser and find them forever homes. Ken be damned.